So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time you are watching this video. So, this will be our first discussion on our course in ethics. So, before we begin, we often have to consider what it means to be ethical, what it means to do what is right, or to judge whether we know whether an action is right or wrong. So what is ethics, right? When we speak of ethics, you might have in your mind the concept of what one ought to do given the circumstances one is in. Okay? Kung bisayon, kung maghiskot kag ethics, usahay mo naunahon kung unsa diri angay buhaton ana nga sitwasyon. Diba? Tagalogin natin, diba? Kung ang ethics minsan ay yung decision mo kung anong karapat dapat gawin sa isang sitwasyon or kung sa isang event na particular sa buhay mo. Okay? So ethics is basically a guide, no? A guide on how we should behave. Okay? But before we get into that, let us look into what we call a nominal understanding of ethics. So when we say nominal, let us look into the name. Okay, the name, the word itself. Okay, so when we speak of ethics, we usually think of morality as well. Okay, since these two are basically difficult to separate from each other. Okay, so ethics is also called moral philosophy, which is the discipline concerned with what is considered morally good and morally bad. What is right and what is wrong in terms of our behavior or in terms of how we ought to act in front of other people and especially to ourselves or to the situation we are placed in. Okay? So the term is also applied to any system or theory of moral values or principles. Okay? So it not only do we limit it to the actions of the individual, we also consider naming this into the theories or the principles that we adhere to, okay, or what our society adheres to, right? Because basically there are ethics that differ from place to place or from person to person. Okay, so what is the difference then? Okay, when we speak of ethics, ethic comes from the Old French ethique, or the late Latin ethica, and even the Greek ethos. Okay? And it is referred to customs or moral philosophies. Okay, so when we say customs, that is basically the behavior within a certain culture, a certain group of people, or a certain society. Okay? So whatever the ethics of your culture or your group of people are, that is what we call ethics. Okay? Whereas morals comes from the late Latin moralis, which referred to appropriate behavior and manners in society. Okay, so as you can see, these are two things that are commonly interchangeable, but they tend to be different in many cases. How so? Let's look into it now. Okay, so if you look at the box or if you look at the table, there are two particular tables that differentiate ethics and morals. Okay. So nominally speaking, ethics basically means moral principles or moral philosophies or customs, whereas morality or moralis is how one should behave, right? So in ethics, if we look at the first differentiation, ethics are the rules of conduct recognized in respect to a particular class of human actions or a particular group or culture. Okay? So basically it is dependent on the actions of a group or a culture depending on where you are. Okay? So basically, for example, if we here in Ligan behave a certain way, the way we behave here is different than the way the other people behave in places like, for example, Manila. Okay, things like that. Okay, morals are basically principles or habits okay, with respect to right or wrong conduct. While morals also describe the do's and don'ts, morality is ultimately a personal compass of right and wrong. Okay, so here you see it now. The second part, the second pane, or the second box, or the second table will tell us that ethics is basically comes from a social system. Therefore, it is external. Okay, we follow what others demand. Whereas morals is more on individual. Okay, it is internal. It comes from yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean that you already know what's right. It seems more or less what you consider to be personally right and wrong in your standards are more or less taken from how you understand ethics, right? So, going back, we look again into this now. So, ethics again is the actions of a particular group of people or culture. Okay, so since we look into the culture, then our behavior is dependent on the social system, or that which is external, or that which comes from outside our own personal understanding of right and wrong. Whereas morals, though, are more though inspired by the ethics of where you're from, it becomes something that is personal. It becomes individual. It comes from you, basically. Okay. Okay. So because society says it is the right thing to do, then that is what we do. Okay, that is ethics. So since it is external, then it means that society says that it is the right thing to do. Whereas morals, we do it because we believe in something being right or wrong. Because it comes from your belief, something that comes from you, ikaw mismo. What you think is right, what you think is wrong. Therefore, this is what I profess. This is what I have to do. Since I believe that this is wrong, even if others will say it is right, I will still be wrong under my principles. Okay. So I hope this is understandable. No, again, ethics again is something dependent on the social system. Nakadepende siya sa grupo sa tao. Okay. So kung ang grupo mo is puro mga religious, then you follow the customs of the religious group. Okay. If excuse me, if you belong to a group that is more or less mga, let's say, parumbado, then they have their own ethics, they have their own behavior that for them is acceptable. Okay, so since this group or this particular culture says that we have to do this, then we will do this because that is what this culture says or what this group says, right? Whereas morals is more or less individual. Again, it is not necessarily dependent on the group. However, you take inspiration from the principles of the group and make it personal. Alright? So again, because we believe in something being right or wrong, then that is what we will adhere to. So if I believe that this is wrong, then I will not do it. If I believe that this is right, then I will do this, regardless of what the society says. Okay? So ethics are dependent on others for definition. Okay? They tend to be consistent within a certain context, but can vary between contexts. So what does this mean? So as we said, no, ethics are dependent on others for definition. Nakadepende sa ibang tao kung paano kung anong tama o anong hindi tamang gawin sa nakadepende sa konteksto. Okay? So, if you belong to a certain group, as was mentioned earlier, if you belong to a certain group, then how you behave within that group is dependent on who belongs to that group. Okay? So nakadepende sa grupo mo, sa society mo, sa kultura mo, sa religion mo, kung anong dapat gawin base sa kung anong prinsipyo sa grupo. Okay? So again, nakadepende sa ibang tao ang pag-intindi kung anong tama, anong mali para sa grupo na yan. Okay? So ang morality is usually consistent, although can change if an individual's beliefs can change. Okay? So since ethics depends on others for definition, morality is since it depends on the person, consistent naman siya. However, it can change because malamang a person can also change. Okay? So if the person could believe this thing at this moment, maybe 10 years from now, this person might change his or her belief. Okay? So consistent siya depende sa tao. Okay? But just as a person can change, that person's views can also change. Okay? So next, a person strictly following ethical principles may not have any morals at all. Okay? Likewise, one could violate ethical principles within a given system of rules in order to maintain moral integrity. Okay? So before we explain that, let's look at the last part. A moral person, although perhaps bound by a higher covenant, may choose to follow a code of ethics as it would apply to a system. Okay? So if you would look at this, no, hindi porket ethical ka, moral ka. If just because you follow ethical rules doesn't make you a moral person. Likewise, a person can break ethical principles in order to follow his or her moral integrity. Okay, so remember, even though that these two things can be are often interchanged by some standards, we also have to take note that ethics and morality by themselves are two different concepts. Magkaiba sila kasi even though that they might have the same nominal definition or the same principles that hold them as such, they are still two different concepts that need to be differentiated. Kasi hindi naman pwede na ma-interchange mo siya thinking na tamang ginagawa mo, yun pala hindi. Okay? So just because society says it is good, it doesn't necessarily make it good. Diba? So again, hindi porket na sumusunod ka palagi sa rules, makatarungan ang ginagawa mo. Okay? Just because you follow rules, it doesn't make you a good person. Okay? And likewise, sometimes for us to maintain the goodness of our principles, which we believe to be good, minsan we do not follow the rules, diba? But of course, it is dependent on what the rule demands. Okay? So, a moral person, although perhaps bound by a higher covenant, may choose to follow a code of ethics as it would apply to a system. In other words, to make it fit. So, for example, if I have a certain belief, if I say that I believe in certain things like I believe in God, and that I believe that God should be the author of all things I do, then I find an ethical principle or ethical rules by a group, then I try to make my beliefs fit into the code of ethics na gihatag. Okay? But it's dependent. It depends. Okay? So, since I believe that there is something higher, that there is a higher law than the law of the land or ang law sa tao, simply because I believe that there is something greater than man, it doesn't mean that I have to break all the rules in order to justify my belief. Okay? So there are reasons why there are beliefs that we continue to have. At the same time, we follow the demands of the culture we belong to or the society we belong to. Okay? Alright. So, to summarize the two differences, again, so ethics come from the Greek word ethos, meaning character, which this is another definition. And morality, aside from moralis, it is also known as mos, which means custom. Okay? So if you look at these definitions or this etymological understanding of the origins of the word ethics and morality, it all has to do with how who we are and how we behave. Okay? Character is who we are and how we behave towards other people. Custom is how we behave in general. Kung sa behavior nato sa usa ka lugar, that is the custom of the place we belong to. Okay? So what is the custom of Iligan? Ang custom sa Iligan is that we have no choice but to live together despite the differences of cultures. Okay? So within Iligan, there are 3 particular cultures, or siguro we can say 4. Okay? We have the Maranao, we have the Bisaya, we have the Higaonon, and we have the Bajau. All of these are different cultures, and the custom, since all of us are together in this one city, then there are certain things that we try to respect. Diba? Right. So, ethics are governed by professional and legal guidelines within a particular time and space. So basically, this is the summary of what we want to how we try to understand ethics. Okay? So ang ethics na is governed, in other words, ang ethics gihimo or ginawa sa pamamagitan ng mga professional or mga legal na pamamalakad. Okay? Pero nakadepende ito sa lugar at sa oras. Okay? Whereas morality transcends cultural norms. Ang morality mas lamang pa sa demanda sa kultura or sa society. Okay? So what does it mean for ethics being governed by professional and legal guidelines? Okay? So this basis simply means na yung dapat mong sundin na behavior, again, nakadepende kung saan ka. Okay? It depends on where you are and the time in which you are in it. Okay? Whereas morality, again, since from the word itself, transcend, it means it goes beyond cultural norms. Okay? Mas lamang pa siya sa demanda sa kultura mo, sa society mo, sa nation, sa bansa mo. Okay? So, basically, that's the difference. Okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be easy to understand, but the point is that they are two things that can be different, but they are always connected to each other. Okay? So since they are always connected to each other, even though they're both different, then we cannot completely separate the two concepts. Okay? So ethics will always be a part of our daily lives. Okay? So the ethics of the school is that you have given the example that we're in, no? Or in the previous time, that if you're in school, you have to wear your uniform, your ID. Okay, that is the ethics of that particular place. But when you go out of the school, lahi na po na ethical guidelines. Okay? Kay kung unsay demanda sa school, lahi man po ang demanda sa computer shop. Di ba? So when you go to the computer shop, they have a different set of ethics. Okay? You go there to play, go there to use the computer, pero the ethics there is that you don't disturb other people using their computer. Diba? Likewise, if you go to a church or if you go to the mosque, iba din ang ethics or ethical demands sa lugar na yun. Okay? Silence and respect and sacredness is the ethical demands when you go to a religious institution, or if you go to church, or if you go to mosque. Diba? So, it's different. Your attitude or the behavior in the church or in the mosque is different from your behavior when you go to school. Okay? So, that's what we mean by nakadepende siya sa professional or legal guidelines. So, when you say professional, it doesn't necessarily have to be secular, no? So, things like that. Alright. So, with that in mind, let us look into the source of principles. Ano say source of prinsipyo? Aning mga butanga, okay? So ethics are external standards that are provided by institutions, groups, or culture to which an individual belongs. Okay? For example, lawyers, policemen, and doctors all have to follow an ethical code laid down by their profession, regardless of their own feelings or preferences. Ethics can also be considered a social system or a framework of acceptable behavior. Okay? So we're basically pabalik-balik lang sa pag-explain sa similar concepts, no? Because we have to understand, we have no choice but to understand that ethics, again, in order for you to drill it in your minds, again, ethics are external standards. So, sa external standards, mga standards siya na dilipitan sa inyo ha. Diba? Ethics are standards that do not come from you, they come from the group you belong to. Okay? So, whether it's culture or the institute or the group or the religion you belong to, these are standards that are given to you to follow, but they are not personally yours. Okay? Mga balaod ni na dili imuha, dili personal nimo. ginasunod, di ba? Like, no one grows up following rules. I mean, you follow rules, pero you follow the rule of the family. Okay? Kung say balaod sa family, that's what you follow. So that's the start, di ba? It doesn't come from you. It's not your personal want. It's not something you want, pero it's something that you have to follow simply because parte ka na ng group. Okay? Basically, that is ethics. Morals are also influenced by culture or society. Again, yes, they are influenced. However, they are personal principles created and upheld by individuals themselves. Okay? So, yes, they are influenced by the culture or the society or even the religion you belong to. However, this isn't something na automatic na moabot sa inyo. Okay? Morals are basically for people who are mature enough to make a decision. Okay? So ethics are followed for us to follow, created by others who came before us, diba? But then it's up to you if you allow these ethical principles to become your moral standards, your personal moral principles. Okay? So ayun. Okay? Moving on. Before we move on, again, I hope this is understood, no? So the source of the principles of ethics comes from outside. It comes from others, or it comes from the group or culture that you belong to. Morals, the source of the principles within morality, are more or less, yes, they are influenced by the culture of the society, but at the same time, the main purpose is basically mga personal principles that you have, created by you. Okay? So if you believe in God, when you were young, you didn't know that there's a God, but people tell you that there's a God. Later on in life, when you mature, you make it something personal. Okay? And because it is personal, it is something you create yourself. Okay? So of course, when we say belief in God, that is not necessarily a behavior that is right or wrong. Okay? That is dependent on the person. Okay? There are those who do not believe, diba? So when we say things like that, or let's say for example, for something more tangible, no? Let's say for example, no one grows up believing that abortion is wrong or right. No one grows up believing that murder is wrong or right. But later on, since society tells us that this is wrong and right, these things are wrong or these things are right, then later on in life, we make it something that is personal. Okay, we understand that why society tells us that this is wrong or right, but it is up to us to make it personal. Okay, so that is why we have, that is why we have guides, diba? Which is be it our parents, our teachers, or even our religious leaders, people like that. They tend to help create this understanding of personal belief. Okay, so it is not necessarily na kita jud mismo maghimo, no? Remember, what we create, the principles we create for ourselves are most of the time inspired or influenced by the mga balaod na naga-exist na. Okay, so we continue. Okay, so consistency and flexibility. Earlier we discussed ahagikan, unsay source aning mga prinsipyo. Karon let's look at how unsa ka consistent o flexible ang mga prinsipyo na naaaning ethics o morality. So let's look first at ethics, no? Ethics are very consistent within a certain context. Okay, let's look at this first. Ethics can be very consistent within a certain context. So when we say context, the context, for example, is school. Okay? So consistent jud ang ethics sa context to sa school. Okay? Since you are following the demands of the school, consistent jud na ani na context. Right. So the next group of words, but can vary greatly between contexts. Okay. So if you're in school, regarding the example we had earlier, if you're in school, consistent yun ang konteksto sa ilang prinsipyo or sa mga ethical norms na dapat nimo sundon. Diba? So if you're in school, consistent ang balaod sa school. You're not allowed to date in school. You're not allowed to drink in school or smoke in school. you're expected to follow whatever the school asks you to follow, diba? However, the moment you go out of the school, that is already a different context. Okay? So diba, you are aware that lahi imong kinaiya or lahi imong personalidad, lahi imong gipakita sa eskwelahan compared sa imong gipakita kung kinsa ka sa gawas. Okay? Kay dili man pwede na kung unsay batasan nimo sa school idala nimo sa computer shop or sa simbahan or sa fambam, diba? So basically when you see varied ang kada context, remember that sa life in the situation you find yourself in, lain-lain ang konteksto sa kada lugar. Okay? So again, ang konteksto sa eskwelahan lahi, ang konteksto sa iyong balay lahi, ang konteksto sa lugar na kung kagalaag lahi pod. Okay? So consistent siya ani na lugar, pero the moment na mohawa ka na ng lugar, lahi na pod ang konteksto nila. Okay? So in every context or in every place, there is an ethics that each place follows. Okay? Even in the jeep, there is an ethics there. The ethics there is that if you are the person in front, then someone will pass you their fare, then you have to pass that fare to the driver. And likewise, the driver will accept it and bring you to wherever you go. Diba? Of course, kung mamukong ra ka, then you are being unethical. Diba? Not only unethical, but you are also being immoral. So that's one example of how you differentiate and at the same time connect ethics and morality. Okay, so for example, the ethics of a medical profession in the 21st century are generally consistent but do not change from hospital to hospital. Okay, so kung sa hospital pa lang daan, for example, ang ethics sa isa ka hospital pareho sa tanan hospital. Okay, so it doesn't mean na ang ethics sa IMCH or Legal Medical Center Hospital lahi pod ang sa Mercy or sa Sanitarium. No, because they all belong to the medical field. Everything that is demanded sa medical field, it is the same in every hospital. Though lahi ang we're not talking about the technology, pero we're talking about the ethics, how they should operate as a medical facility or as a place where medical professionals work. So consistent siya na medical professions are in that place, diba? However, kung i-compare niyo ang binuhatan sa hospital or sa mga mediko or sa mga doktor, i-compare niyo sa mga abogado, okay, mga 21st century legal profession, lahi po na siya na context. Okay, so if you think of it, yes, consistent ang ethics within the hospital, pero lahi na ang ethics within the legal profession. Alright? So when you think of it, in every hospital, pareha doon ang procedure. In every hospital, pareho ang etiquette na ginahatag sa imo as a patient or someone who's visiting. However, you cannot apply the ethics of the medical profession sa ethics sa legal profession. Okay? Why? Again, these are two different contexts. Okay? So, consistent siya sa usa ka context, pero it changes in a different context. Okay? So, when you consider going to look for a legal needs or nakaipa-blatter or gusto ka magpalit og yuta or nakay gusto ikaso, things like that. So, you don't go to the hospital, diba? You go to the lawyer. You don't go to the clinic, you go to the law office. You don't go to the doctor, you go to the lawyer, right? So in ethics, you have these two different concepts. Okay, I mean not two. No, you have a certain context na dapat nimo tan-awon. Okay? So basically, diba, our example earlier was kung unsa ka sa school, lahi ka sa gawa sa school. Pero if you go to a different school, even though lahi silang style or lahi silang proseso, the ethics there is the same. You're asked not to cheat, you're asked to wear your uniform, or kung di man ka mag-uniform, dapat the same thing look. You have to wear your ID, you have to greet your teachers, things like that. So the ethics or the behavior you have to show is the same in one context, but it changes within a different context. Okay? So, nga na lang. Okay? So, again, to be clearer, no? Wherever you are, or what place you are in, if it holds the same context, example, the school, then, even if you go to a different school, maura gyapon ang ginademanda sa eskwelahan. Okay? Likewise, if you go to the hospital, kung unsay ginademanda na behavior nimo sa hospital, same ra na sa lain-lain hospital. Okay? However, dili nimo pwede i-apply ang imong behavior sa school sa behavior nimo sa balay or sa behavior nimo sa hospital. Okay? So that's what we mean by consistency and flexibility of the context of ethics, or the principles of ethics, or the concept of ethics. So ang concept sa ethics is that consistent siya sa usa ka lugar ug sa lain-lain na lugar na pareha sa imong una na lugar, pero kung lahi na pud siya na lugar, okay, then lahi pod ang iyang ginasunod na ethics. Okay? So I hope that's clear. So an individual's moral code is usually unchanging and consistent across all contexts, but it is also possible for certain events to radically change an individual's personal beliefs and values. Okay, so in ethics, consistent siya sa kada context, pero depende sa context. Ang moralidad sa usa ka tawo is basically consistent sa tanan. Okay? Excuse me. So, an individual's moral code, ang imong personal na ginatuuhan na sakto, consistent jud na siya, bahalag aha ka. Okay? So, if for example, that I'll just save this example for later. Okay, so, how do we say this? Your moral code will always guide you regardless of the ethics of the place you are in. Okay? So if you believe that rape is wrong, then malamang that you will hold that belief even if you are a doctor. Okay? Even if you are a student. Even if you are a lawyer. So the belief that rape is wrong does not belong only to the police or the lawyers. Rape will be wrong as long as you believe it to be wrong. Okay? And that will be consistent and unchanging regardless kung aha ka. Alright? So, if there are people who think that rape is okay, then bahala kung sa ginatuuhan nimo, you will say that there is something wrong with that person. Diba? So, however, certain beliefs can change depending on what happens to the person. Okay? One might say that murder is wrong, diba? But the moment that someone is motivated to kill someone, then they tend to change their beliefs, diba? And this is a reality. Okay? There are some people who started out as good in our standards. We can say na maayo ni siya nga tao. However, nalay na nahitabo sa yaha, lahi na noon ang iyang pagtuo karon, diba? So these are realities that we have to face, no? Na ang tao na maayo sa una mahimo siya barumbado karon, diba? Simply because something happened to that person. Okay? So remember, but it is also possible for certain events to radically change an individual's personal beliefs and values. Okay? Another events that will happen to a certain person that will change this person's beliefs and values. And this is something that shows na ang morality, even though it is consistent, it can also be it can also be changed. Tingana pod ka flexible ang morality. At this point, you believe in a certain thing, pero because this event happens, the next part of your life, lahi na pod imong ginatuuhan. Okay? So that's what we mean by consistency and flexibility between the concept of ethics and morality. Okay, both are consistent, yes, but both are also flexible in terms of certain events or in certain places that you find yourself in. Okay, kung sa ethics, consistent siya sa usa ka lugar, again, sa lahi na lugar, na lahi pod prinsipyo, lahi na sad ang iyang consistency o iyang flexibility. Okay? So you have to change your behavior depending on the place you belong to. So that is ethics. Morality, regardless of where you are, kung naka sa school, kung naka sa presinto, kung naka sa hospital, kung naka sa syudad, kung unsay ginatuuhan nimo na sakto, kanado nimo sundon. Okay? Whereas, kung unsay ginatuuhan nimo karon, depende kung unsay mahitabo nimo in the certain span of time, this event will eventually change your behavior. Okay? Like, sa pagkabata nimo, gatuo ka na luod ang mag-uyab-uyab, then the moment na makauyab ka, na napod kayo feeling na okay na day siya. Diba? So, this is what we mean by how things change. Since people change, sometimes our beliefs also change. And this is reality. Okay? So, that is consistency and flexibility. That is how we understand consistency and flexibility. Alright? If you are really watching this video, please comment below the difference between ethics and morality in terms of consistency and flexibility. Okay? So if you really follow this, then comment below your personal understanding. Okay? Comment below. And I will know if you will just copy paste. Okay? Moving on. So the conflicts between ethics and morals. So earlier we discussed the origin of the principles of ethics and morality, followed by the consistency and flexibility of morals and ethics. So now we look into the conflict between ethics and morals. So when we say conflict, no. So remember, if you remember that, if you're listening at all, if you remember the earlier subtopic, which was consistency and flexibility. So remember, no, that wherever you are, there are norms na ginasunod nimo, na ay mga balaod na ginasunod nimo. So if you're in the medical profession, you follow what your hospital tells you to do. And simply because mo po na ang standard sa tanan hospitals in the Philippines, for example. However, if you're a police officer, the ethics is also different there. The norms, the demands, the expectations of a police officer are different from the expectations and demands of the medical professional. Okay? But what if ang imong personal na prinsipyo the conflict sa demanda sa trabaho, di ba? So for example, let's leave the example for later. So that's basically the conflict you're going to see late at this particular junction sa atong lesson. Okay? So again, yes, there are demands in the profession you belong to, in the school you belong to, pero what if ikaw mismo lahi imo ginasunod na prinsipyo, di ba? So if your principle is that it's okay to cheat, kay luoy akong classmate kay wa siya nakatuon, pero ang eskwelahan mismo gaingon sad na you're not supposed to cheat because cheating gets you expelled, di ba? So there is a conflict there, di ba? You have to follow the rules that you shouldn't cheat. But then again, your principal tells you that I should cheat because this person did not study, and we think that it's justified, diba? So let's look at this. So one professional example of ethics conflicting with morals is the work of a defense attorney. Okay. So medyo layo siya sa example sa estudyante no. Pero let's look at this. Okay. So ang defense attorney, so nandiri ang conflict. So a lawyer's morals may tell her that murder is reprehensible and that murders should be punished. But her ethics as a professional lawyer require her to defend her client to the best of her abilities, even if she knows that the client is guilty. Okay? Let's put it into connection to you as students. Kabalo mo na mali ang pag-cheat. Kabalo mo na mali ang pagkuha o idea na dili imuha, then mag-ingon ka na imuha siya. Alright. Pero ikaw, hadlok ka na mabagsak, you think na okay lang siya for the sake lang na dili ko mabagsak. For the sake lang na makaingon ko na nakapasar ko. Alright. Diba? But, even though you know that it's wrong, seeing na ikaw makabenefit ka sa pag-cheat or sa pag-plagiarize, gibuhat gihapon mo. So even though that you know it's wrong, gibuhat gihapon nimo kay hadlok ka na mabagsak, diba? So diba ang norm sa school is that you pass in order to move on to the next subject. Tama ba? Then you find yourself in a very awkward position. Okay? So kung unsay ginatuhan nimo na sakto, imong i-compromise para lang makapasar ka. Murag nga na bitaw. So the same thing goes for the lawyer. So the lawyer believes na ang murder mali jud. Pero na-timingan na yung obligation jud as a lawyer is depensahan niya ang tao na guilty or accused na nagpatay jud sa tao. Okay? So what if tinuod jud nagipatay niyang tao? What if daghang evidence na nakapatay siya tao? Pero ikaw as a defense lawyer kailangan nimo depensahan ang imong client. Bahalag kabalo ka na sala jud niya. Nagibuhat jud niya. Okay? So that is where the conflict begins. Naidemanda ang imong trabaho, naidemanda ang imong society, pero imong personal na gituuhan kailangan nimo apakan. Diba? Okay. So another example can be found in the medical field. In most parts of the world, a doctor may not euthanize a patient. So, nasa euthanize, muna ginatawag na mercy killing. Okay. So, in most parts of the world, bawal jud ang euthanasia to mercy kill or assist your patient in committing suicide. Okay? So, even at the patient's request. So, even if moingon ang pasyente na pati ako, kay ka-suffer siya ayo, according to the professional medical field in some places, then dili niya pwede buhaton, diba? Okay, so since ang standard sa ethical profession is health profession is dili ka dapat mo euthanize sa tao even if ang patient may request, ikaw mismo dili ka ginahan na mag-suffer ang tao, diba? Kita gusto makita tao na ga-suffer. And labi na ang tao ga-request jud na patyon na lang nimo siya. Okay? Yun. So, consider na lang po. However, the same doctor may personally believe in a patient's right to die as per the doctor's own morality. So, it can be that even though a place whose ang medical profession says na wala kay right mo euthanize sa tao, bahalag gihangyo sa pasyente, ikaw as a doctor, you might personally believe na kining tawhana has a right to say na dili na siya gusto. Diba? Of course, this is just for discussion ha. Personally, I do not advocate for euthanasia. I do not advocate for suicide. But this is also a reality. Realidad maning na mga pasyente na grabe ilang suffering that they decide na gusto nang sila mamatay. So, hangyo nila ang doktor nila na patyan na lang ko. However, napoy standard ang medical profession na in some places that you are not supposed to kill another human being. Okay? So, here's the dilemma for the doctor. Ang trabaho sa doktor kay dili siya dapat mo allow or pangitaw niya pamaagi na dili na mag-suffer ang pasyente. Pero what if ang pasyente grabe na ang iyang ginaagian ng sakit na wala murag na hope na maayo siya, mas maayo na lang siguro na patyon na lang siya muna ang iyang gihuna-huna. That is what the patient is thinking, and therefore for some doctors they might think na dapat na lang po since para dili na mag-suffer ang iyang pasyente, siguro mas musunod pa siya sa standard sa iyang profession by euthanizing the patient. So, as you can see, this is where conflicts arise. Dire ang conflict na makitaan na ay standard na ginasunod sa usa ka lugar, sa usa ka profession, sa usa ka institution, sa usa ka religion, pero there are moral principles na maoy ga hinder nimo na mosunod, diba? So I hope that's clear. Sige lang, we will discuss this further throughout our discussions, no? Okay? So, siguro nagkalibog naman, no? I mean, yes, libog man siya. It's not supposed, judging what is right and what is wrong is not supposed to be easy. kay depende man gud siya sa sitwasyon, di ba? Dili siya ka complicated. Okay, moving on. So again, ethics is the field of ethics or moral philosophy involves systematizing, defending, and recommending concepts of right and wrong behavior. So now we look into ethics itself as a subject. Okay, so earlier on, medyo heavy siya paminawon. Siguro I'm not sure kung napabay katanaw ninyo ron. So kung if you're still watching at this point, I congratulate you, no? Para not just about the grades, pero I'm hoping po that you actually want to learn something. Okay, so at this point, since we are looking at the subject of ethics, I would deem that we have to end that video at this point, since medyo complicated na kayo atong nahisgutan, and automatically mo skip ta sa lain na topic. Okay, so looking back, ethics is more or less the understanding of the principles na gihatag sa society sa tuwa. And together with that, we have morals that help us understand how to interact with other people using the ethics na gihatag sa lain, and merging it with our own personal perception of right and wrong. Okay, so looking back at the lesson at hand, I hope we were able to discuss much. On the next video, we will look into ethics as the course, ang kurso na inyong ikuha. Okay? So, sir, ang ethics of morality complicated ba dapat? Yes, complicated siya. Kaya usahay kamo pohon as future professionals, as future police officers, as future medical professionals, or as future sa paman, sa profession na inyong gikuha, you're going to have to decide sooner, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to decide on whether or not you're going to follow the demands of the society or the demands of your conscience. Okay? So with that, I end our first lesson. So we will look into another lesson later on, which is the course itself. So thank you, stay safe, God bless, and I hope you learned something.